Thank you for being here. Welcome to our webinar this morning. A couple of quick housekeeping items. Number one, the program has been accepted by the CFP board for 1 hour of continuing ed credit. It is pending acceptance by the NC bar for 1 hour of CLE credit. So we don't expect that there be an issue there, but just it's taken them a while lately, given the COVID environment, for them to get things processed. And the last point would be, if you have a question, we want this to be interactive. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask one of the presenters, the question you have, and we can address those along the way. Again, we hope we put together an informative session for you. A few of the things we're going to talk about today is really reviewing some macro trends in philanthropy, engaging clients in a conversation about philanthropy, understanding maybe their values and goals, and how you can determine the appropriate charity for them to give to, and additionally, what kind of assets may be most appropriate for them to give. So to give you some sense of some of the topics, we've got two great speakers today. We have John Cullum. He is a guest of ours from the American Heart Association. He is with his charitable estate planning at the American Heart Association. He's a certified financial planner. He lives in Charlotte, and he serves the southern states. He works with professional advisors to connect the philanthropy of their clients with the mission of the American Heart Association through several different ways, through estate gifts, through life income gifts, and tax smart giving. We also have Catherine Warfield. She is also CFP. She's been with the foundation for over 13 years, and she's worn many hats over the years, from relationship manager to business development, and most recently, the senior leader of the Philanthropic Advancement team. For those who haven't heard, Catherine and her family recently relocated to Jacksonville, Florida. So she's on her last few months here at the foundation, and we're going to miss her tremendously. I did hopefully wanted to engage her one last time, at least, to tap into her knowledge and expertise to lead one of these webinars. So with that, Catherine, I'm going to kick it over to you if you want to start the program.
Great. Wonderful. And Valerie, hopefully you can keep monitoring the waiting room, and welcome to those that are with us. And thanks, Neil, for that kind introduction. I want to first just say thank you to John for joining. John and I have done a version of this presentation for the local FPA chapter. John is incredibly knowledgeable. He and I share a couple of things in common. We both share a CFP designation. We also share this path that includes both financial services and banking, as well as philanthropy. And I think it is such a wonderful combination. It's been really helpful, I know, to me and John, and I know in his career, he's a wealth of information. And so certainly for you all that have clients who are interested in charitable planning in general, but also in the American Heart Association, I would certainly encourage you to reach out to John as well. And as Neil said, yes, I am joining you all from sunny Florida. Grateful to COVID for making, well, not grateful to COVID, but grateful for the opportunity to be working remotely still for the Foundation for the Carolinas, and for the sort of creativity that this environment has afforded in terms of remote activity and all of that. So glad to be with you all. It's a great group. As I look at the folks that are on today, so many of you are partners at the foundation. You are actively engaging in conversations about philanthropy with your clients already. You are contributing to the dollars that are flowing through in our community. So thank you for that. And thank you for your partnership with the foundation. What that means is that you're knowledgeable likely on all of these topics. So let's make this conversational. As Neil kind of talked about the planning objectives, which I covered, which he mentioned briefly. Let's make sure I can advance the slide. Oh, there we go. Little slow to advance, excuse me. Obviously it's a lot to hit in an hour. So you may have been saying, gosh, that's a lot of information. How in the world are they going to do it in an hour? We're going to do our best. But again, mostly we want to hit everything at a high level and leave plenty of room for discussion, dialogue, and questions from you. I'm going to start with just a really high level review of sort of some macro trends in philanthropy, looking at sort of the overall landscape and how that might impact some of the conversations you're having with your clients. And I suspect also with your clients' family members, and this idea of generational perspectives in philanthropy, and how different generations approach the concept of charitable giving, and how that might be impacting your multi-generational family conversations. John's going to do a deep dive, just looking at how the trends impact each sort of sector of the generations, which I think is always interesting and refreshing. I somehow hear something different every time I hear that information, so I'm excited about that. Talk a little bit about some good questions to engage your clients in conversations about philanthropy. Again, those on the call today, I know are doing this and are doing this really well. Although I will say we hear a lot, from advisors that they are, for whatever reason, might be hesitant to engage in those conversations with clients, if the clients don't bring that up. So are there ways you can, kind of ease into those conversations about philanthropy, not only around sort of impact, but also just a good way to get at values and family engagement? And talk a little bit about the different types of charitable organizations. And John's going to do that, the different kinds of charities and ways you can support the work of those charities. We'll touch quickly on different types of assets to give, as well as different gift structures. And then we want to end on a few sort of current planning trends that you all might be seeing, and certainly invite discussion around things like the Secure Act, the IRA Charitable Rollover, the increased deduction that currently is set to expire at the end of this year related to the CARES Act. So kind of thinking about how we've seen those play out in terms of client giving. So again, it's a lot to cover. We'll do our best. I can't remember if we said this. Please, I'm not monitoring chat because I'm projecting, but please do feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. We've got a small enough group here where that's actually doable. You're also welcome to load your question in the chat. So, please know we want this to be conversational. Okay, so with that, really quickly, these numbers just got released. So this is sort of hot off the press as of June. It's usually about a 6-month delay in terms of reviewing the numbers. These are published every year by an organization called Giving USA. They have been doing this report for over 60 years, where they track charitable giving in our country and release the data. Always really interesting. Interesting tidbit. I think in the 60 plus years the report has been going, there's only 3 years on record where the number has ever actually declined in a sort of raw data year over year. 08 and 09 were 2 of those years. So you see here last year, 470 billion to charity. That's actually up from 427 billion last year. Big jump, I think, and really good to see. I think actually the jump was not as sizable. I want to say it was like 390 the year before to 427. So obviously a big jump, especially in a really interesting time. Don't expect you to look at all these sort of data points. I think what we want you to know as professional advisors who are advising high net worth families and individuals is a couple of things. One, the majority of the giving in our country is coming from individuals, right? So you see the first number at 69% of giving by individuals. But honestly, if you think about lumping in the 9%, which are individuals who are giving by testamentary transfer as part of their estate, there's another 9 million. And then you think about giving by foundations. Now, again, a lot of those foundations are started and funded by individuals, by families. Some are corporate, some are other, but a lot of them are families. So what does this tell us? The majority of giving in our country is coming from individuals in some way, shape, or form. I think it's always interesting to me to look at the giving by area, by category. So you see the number, and this has consistently been true, the highest number as a percentage is to religion. And while that might not be surprising to many folks, what's interesting to me is that number has declined and continues to be on decline as a percentage of the total. So I think 25 years ago, this report you may have seen that number well in excess of 50 or 60%. So our religion remains top. There are other areas that are growing sort of in popularity and interest. And certainly I think education and human services often, end up at the top of the list. And then typically you see a fluctuation on sort of international affairs and some kind of some of those sectors based on sort of whether or not there's a natural disaster, a major, we saw earthquake in Haiti, landslide and tsunamis, in the middle and the Far East, we saw big kind of ranges in those years. So there is some fluctuation there. So one of the things that when John and I know, when we both speak to fundraisers, right? So if we're talking to fundraisers who are looking to approach people like your clients about encouraging them to give, we talk about this idea a lot in terms of moving, from the concept of fundraising to the concept of philanthropy. And so it's sort of a trend right now from a fundraising perspective to think about it being more relationship based, which again, all of you as advisors who are building and managing your own portfolio of clients understand this concept of how important relationships are, building those relationships, understanding sort of people's values and motivations in a way that really creates the best possible outcome. The same is absolutely true on the philanthropic side. The goal is for it to be relational, for it to be participatory and engaging. And I think this idea of identifying interests and values from a donor's perspective with the organizations that are best positioned to help them feel that impact. Right. And so this idea of making an investment and the community making an investment in the organization, as opposed to, frankly, what may have previously been considered more of a handout, right? Or a need, as opposed to an opportunity. So this is, I think, that, something that's really important, I think, for John and me and others in the philanthropic space, to really build a culture of philanthropy in whatever shape. I will say it doesn't mean it has to be big gifts. And you'll see later, one of the things that we'll talk about is a great question to ask your clients. We always find is, what's the most meaningful gift you've ever made? Typically, it's not the biggest one, right? It usually has something else to do with family or values, but it's a great way to start to engage in that conversation. Another concept that a lot of fundraisers or philanthropic planners might use is this idea of how to start giving, maybe, and typically these usually are about dollar amounts, right? So the idea of annual giving, which is typically how most donors start out. They might be giving to their child's PTA. They might be giving to their alma mater as an alumni. They might be giving to their local food bank or their local human service organization, their local house of worship. It's typically the way that people begin engaging in philanthropy. And a lot of times it happens without people realizing it. So I think one of the things too, for you all as advisors to listen for is, they might not see that $1,000, $100, whatever it is, contribution on an annual basis to the same organization as philanthropy. But over a number of years, those gifts add up and they mean something. They mean something for the donor, and they also mean something for the organization they're supporting. Typically, the sort of next rung there is the major giving. So here you are starting to talk about larger gift amounts. You're starting to talk about potentially more negotiation between the donors and the organizations themselves. That's something we also do a lot of, where we might be negotiating everything from payment terms to recognition or anonymity concerns, potential restricted purposes for the organizations. And so that sort of major giving might be, again, where you're starting to talk about higher dollar amounts. And then, typically the sort of top of the pyramid in the fundraising world is seen as the planned giving. So a lot of times the largest gift a donor is going to make is the one they make when they pass away. And that is true for so many donors. And I think, I know there's folks from our planned giving office here and the head of our planned giving on the call today. It's such an important part of our work. And such an important part, especially in the last year, I think, as people have been working on estate plan updates to how to incorporate plan giving as part of that overall plan. And we're going to talk about some practical aspects of that later. A couple other kind of trends to hit on a high point before I turn it over to John. This idea of wealth transfer, and we just talked about that as it relates to plan giving, is really big. This isn't a new concept. I've been here for 13 years. I think we've been using some version of these stats, which again, change every couple of years, all that time. But the idea of the expected wealth transfer, there was a lot of studies out of Boston that projected the total dollars that were to change hands and the impact to charity as the next generation is positioned to inherit a significant amount of wealth. What that means is that organizations, nonprofits, need to be focused on plan giving, just like they are focused on meeting their annual giving targets. It's hard for them to do, especially the smaller nonprofits. And so I think it does become incumbent on us as advocates for philanthropy and on you as advisors to make sure that, to the extent folks have interest in making those gifts at death, that we help advise them and do everything we can there, because those really are going to make a huge difference in our local nonprofit sustainability. Rise of women in philanthropy, stats are here. There's plenty more. Bottom line, I think for us, and when we speak on this topic around fundraising, is the importance of engaging both husband and wife in the dialogue, right? And making sure that the whole family unit is engaged, whether it's related to the financial planning or the charitable planning or both. But women are making have a huge role in determining where the dollars are going from households. And there's a lot of statistics to back that up, as well as just sort of female-headed households more likely to get involved. And then multi-generational giving. So, a whole nother topic. And we actually did a presentation on this. Whitney Feld on our team did one in the fall on this, and this idea of the importance of engaging the next generation because of the wealth transfer I just mentioned, and because of the sort of leadership opportunities, engaging them in the conversation about charitable giving. So here are just some interesting stats around the importance of parental giving and its linkage to children's interest in giving back as well, right? So you see there around actually interesting between daughters versus sons, that modeling has a bigger impact on daughters versus talking about it, having a conversation has a bigger impact on sons. regardless, what it means is that this can be a family affair, and it can be a wonderful family affair. But it's important to start early and to start having those conversations about incorporating charitable giving to the extent the clients are interested in that, of course. So just in summary, macro trends, we talked about sort of overall women in philanthropy, multi-generational, and John's going to talk about generational differences. I think another, other things that are happening are sort of the technological advances on giving. So a lot of, and the nonprofit industry struggling to evolve as fast as they need to, right, as it relates to the technology aspect. There's also a huge demand, I think, from donors, particularly next-gen donors, on wanting to understand the impact of their dollars, their return on investment, if you will, and the nonprofit's ability to deliver on that. And so I think this idea of understanding how the dollars are used, if they were effective, becomes increasingly important as we look at the next generation getting involved. And then there's just more options, right? There's more donor advised funds have proliferated in the last 10, 20 years, different types of assets you can give, constantly wanting to monitor the legislative environment. So bottom line is it's not always just easy. It's not always just about giving the money away. You want to do it in a way that's effective, that's tax efficient, that maximizes the client's charitable goals, but also, makes them feel good. So hopefully the goal is that we can kind of address all aspects of that today. So John, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to touch on generational giving.
Great, Catherine. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. It's interesting as I look at generational giving, and as I have gotten older, it certainly becomes more relevant to me, because what my desires are and my interests are very different than what my children, who are in their 30s. We see the world through the lens of our lifetime, and that's just something to remember. The world, whether it is philanthropic giving, whether it's our political views, whether it's religion, whether it's the social impacts we make, we see those through the lens of our lifetime. So we're going to start with the matures. And the matures also are known as the silent generation. They are also known as traditionalists, because again, you think these are people who were born before 1945, and they saw a lot of things that were very different than the Generation Alpha, which is the current generation. But I want to read you some of the topics that the Pew Institute found through some research that they did. The silent generation, the most important thing that affected their life was 9/11. And I think we would see that in almost all of the generations, because it had an impact on us all. They went on World War II, JFK assassination, Vietnam, the moon landing, the election of President Obama, the technological revolution. And I think that's really important to recognize, not only from a giving perspective, but as how we communicate with our clients and donors, because we think somebody who was born in 1945, 20 years ago, they were very much in the workforce when technology took over the way we do things. So people are very in tune to that. The civil rights movement comes in there, Korea, and of course the Depression and the Cold War. But what we see here is that this is a high volunteering group. They're also very involved in religious and spiritual activities. Probably 60% of those donate, and 51% of those donate their time. As we see the other generations, we'll see that that really is very different. 11% donate to human rights causes, because again, I think they saw the Vietnam and Dr. King being assassinated, that affected the way they think about the world. Emergency relief, troops our veterans, goes back to World War II, the arts, and advocacy and election campaigns. Again, I think we saw the revolution that we had in our country through the social changes that occurred in the 60s, made this very different. As we look at baby boomers, and of course I'm in that group, you may laugh and say, John, you're really in the traditionalist group, and I'm really not, I'm really in the boomer. But these are from 1946 to 1964. And again, the world is very different for them in a lot of ways. But I'm going to tell you what the Pew Institute found. The most important social event that happened was 9/11, President Kennedy's assassination, World War II, President Obama's election, the moon landing. And again, for me, that was a big event that happened when I was growing up. Technology, civil rights, follow the Berlin Wall, Dr. King's assassination, and then the wars that began in Afghanistan and Iraq. Again, that all of that changed the way we perceive the world and the way we either trust the government or we don't trust the government. We believe what comes in the news or what doesn't come in the news. The volunteer rate from this group, again, is very high, it's 25.7%. And baby boomers represent 43% of total giving. So when you think about it, again, it's people that are between their early 70s through their mid 50s. And many of those folks are still working. Many of those are making the most money they've ever made in their life. 8% donate to human rights causes. And what you will notice here and on the other slides, the contributions into spiritual and religious causes have decreased, and they continue to decrease. As we look at Gen X, again, it's very interesting. This is the group that's going to be inheriting from grandparents and parents. So the estimate on this slide is $40 trillion through, and as Catherine said, for the last 20 years, 25 years, we've been talking about this, and it is beginning to happen. This group, again, has a high volunteer rate of 28.9%, 38% give to religious or spiritual. Again, we see that number going down. Health services, animal rights, and welfare. But this is the first time we see the environmental protection comes in. This is the group that's beginning to look at the environment, and they're the ones who really are saying, we need to do something about this because I'm going to live a long time. And, you know, there are people obviously that believe this, and there are others who do not. But if a lot of people do believe that the world is being affected by the way we've treated it, and as a result, the climate's getting warmer and colder, depending on where you are. Gen X also, the Pew Center found that 9/11 was one of the most important things that happened. The election of President Obama, the fall of the Berlin Wall, technology, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the Gulf War, gay marriage, Hurricane Katrina, Columbine shootings, Orlando shootings, and Oklahoma City bombings. Again, we see in the transition here, we're going more to social impact. So we're going to see down on the bottom that people are going to health services, animal rights, and again, the environment. If we go to the next slide, is millennials. And I'm going to read what the Pew Institute found: 9/11, the election of President Obama, the wars, gay marriage, technology, Orlando shooting, Katrina, Columbine, bin Laden, Sandy Hook, the Boston Marathon bombing, and then this is the first time we see the Great Recession. These are children that were born, or people that were born between 1977 and 1995. I say children simply because my children were born in this time period. And I think if you ask them, that what they would say was 9/11 and the recession, because the world changed for us. The way we spent money, whether we had more or less, we felt like we had less, and we felt like we needed to be more secure. You'll see here that the volunteer rate goes down because, again, more of these people are working. They make a fourth of the population of the United States. So there again, what they're doing and the way they're perceiving the world, the lens, as I mentioned earlier, that they're learning the world is becoming very different. Human rights and are again, are very important to them. Child development, because this is the group that has children. Victims of crime and abuse. And again, that goes back to what we see from what the Pew Center found, is that they have seen the school shootings, and it makes them think about it very differently. Religious and charitable contribution goes down, but the human rights contributions go up. And what's really interesting is 84% of the employees donate to a nonprofit in 2014. So we see that it may be $5, it may be $10, but they have seen their parents and their grandparents give, and it has become more of a trend. As we move to Gen X, again, that's again a very interesting group. They make up 40% of the customers in the United States. So when you think about the what you see in the stores and what you see online, a lot of it really is geared to this group. They've already donated. 1 in 10 want to start a charity because, again, they're very independent in their thinking, and they want the mobile apps. I like mobile apps, but they are ones that see it differently. 70% of them are worried about the planet. 60% of them want to make a difference in the world. So again, the Pew Institute study that I'm referencing happened after this group really came into more of an adulthood to make these conversations. But Gen Z was born 1996 to 2012. So that's
Sorry,
just something.
John. I just
That's
went
okay.
right past you. I was trying to find the chat.
Yeah. And then the last group, which we don't have a slide for, is Gen Alpha, and that's 2013 to 2025. And I think if we did this today, we would say that everyone would say the number one effect on the way they view the world is the pandemic, because that's affected all of us in every kind of imaginable way. But you think about this Gen Alpha, who they are the ones who are going to school remotely. They're the ones who've not seen their friends in a year and a half. We see college freshmen that aren't experiencing their freshman year of college the way we may have. So that's going to change all of this as well. But I think it's interesting as we think about giving as a whole. All right, now let's move on to the next one. There. So generation by giving, as Catherine mentioned earlier, giving is up 2.2% by individuals this past year. What has been up is giving to religion, giving to education, human rights, giving to foundations. And I think what we saw in 2020 is that it's a result of what's going on in the world. What went down is giving to health. What went up, again, is giving to public safety, public societal benefit organizations. And that was about 16%. So that's really pretty big. What we see here in this slide is how many people in each category are giving, how many charities they give to. So we go to the far right-hand circle that has MA in it, that's for the maturers. They give to an average of 6.3 different charities for $29 billion a year. So what we see at American Heart is that our donors who make planned gifts, and we're one of the recipients, we're one of 7 charities that are named in their estate plan. So when people are philanthropic, they're philanthropic. It not only carries into planned giving, but it also transitions into their current giving. We see with the baby boomers, again, they give an average of 4.2 charities. Gen X is 3.8, Millennials are 3.5, and Gen Z is 4.6. So again, we see that consistently, that people have multiple interests, and they are given to charities at the same time. So we'll move. So it's still, we're going to Catherine now.
And thank you, John. And they want you to mute. So we had a question in the chat, which I think is timely because of the conversation we were just having about sort of where donors give and how that might change by generation. So a question we had received was, are we seeing more donors who are designating gifts to religious institutions, but for sort of local missions? So I think the example would be, okay, you're giving to your church, but you're designating the dollars for benevolences or for local outreach to the food bank and crisis assistance ministry and the like. And I think it's a really good question. It sort of, to me, illustrates why sometimes the categories themselves are challenging. And so and just so you all know, so we call them NTEE codes. It's the National Taxonomy of Exempt Entities. It is an IRS designation that happens at the organizational level that identifies them as sort of a type of organization, a type of recipient, right? Are you a religious institution? Are you an educational institution? Are you a, advocacy and social benefit type organization? What is it? So it's based on the organization. So what it doesn't allow us to do, and as the question indicated, is to drill down further and say, okay, what if you're, a church that also runs a shelter, a homeless shelter, and 90% of your dollars maybe go towards that mission, right? But you're considered a religious organization. So, I feel like I always want to take those a little bit with a grain of salt, because it doesn't allow you to drill down, and it's not our view. It's really the organization being forced to identify in this rubric from the IRS. So therefore I can't answer the question from a pure data perspective, but what I'll say is that I think it's absolutely happening. And I think as the dollar amounts get bigger, in particular for donors, and John, I'll be curious on your take about this, as the dollar amounts get bigger, donors, a lot of donors may want to impose additional restrictions around the use of the funds. And while that is, I think, totally the donor's right and to do that, it can sometimes have a negative effect on the recipients in terms of having to, allocate the funds and then raise dollars for the other programmatic aspects that they need. And you think about the United Way and the way they do their campaign and how you can designate funds, but of course, the ideal scenario for them, and really frankly for any nonprofit recipient, the holy grail of funding is unrestricted, right? Allow them to use it for the best and highest purpose, but fully understand that that doesn't work for all donors. And I think this idea, and also I think as organizations sort of bleed in terms of how they operate in any community, especially in smaller communities where you may have one organization that serves a number of roles, this idea of earmarking your donation for particular aspects that are important to you, right, that are meaningful to you, absolutely. We do see that as the question indicated. But John, I don't know what other thoughts you would have there.
Catherine, I would agree with you. If we look at the generational spectrum as well, maturers tend not to restrict, whereas we get into baby boomers and especially Gen X and Gen Y. Yes, people do want to restrict it. Because they want to make sure that the money that they're giving is used for a certain purpose that they want. As Catherine did say, though, we have to pay expenses. And so we're just a funnel for money that comes in that goes directly out, but we've been involved in it. We have to pay salaries. We have to pay the power bill, the phone bill, and everything else. So what most people are doing today is in gift agreements, there is an allocation for a portion of that gift that will go to pay for overhead of the nonprofit. And that has to happen simply because the organization has to pay salaries. If you look at Charity Navigator, that's a good indication to show you how many, what percentage is going to overhead and fundraising and what's going actually to the mission. So that should be more the driving force of this, but we see it all the time, and as Catherine mentioned, especially the larger the gift, the more that the person wants to have it tied into what they're doing. But you are seeing this allocation of expenses to the gift as well.
So great question, and y'all keep them coming. So we sort of hit all the trends and generational aspects. We're going to kind of move into maybe some practical suggestions about having this conversation with your clients. And again, I know everybody on this call, may have a different way that they approach this, and one that's working. And I know some folks kind of include it as part of their, checklist, right? In terms of annual goals, maybe it's checklist, maybe sounds too elementary, but sort of an idea of a goal category for family and financial planning for the year. It certainly can be part of the analysis on the spending and budgeting and financial portfolio as well. I think a lot of times when we're approached by a new client and we're trying to gauge sort of where they are on the spectrum, we might ask these types of questions, right? Which are everything from, what kinds of gifts have you made in the past? What types of assets? How have you funded that? As I mentioned earlier, this idea of annual giving, a great question is, sort of what are the organizations you're giving to and supporting on an annual basis? Because again, I think a lot of people hear the word philanthropy and they think it means big dollar amounts, right? Or they think, oh, I don't have enough money to be a philanthropist. And the reality is that, everyone can be a philanthropist. And a lot of times it's not even just about money, volunteering, time, talent, treasure, all of those things. And so understanding who they're supporting year over year, and even pulling together and saying, okay, you might be giving a small amount year over year, but if you look at it in cumulative impact, it actually is quite meaningful. I think always this idea of asking about what role charitable giving played, both in terms of the donor growing up, if you're dealing with sort of matriarch patriarch situation, and then also how it's involved in the family today. I think, so often we sit down and the conversations typically begin with, especially when you're talking about the matures and the baby boomers, it's my family, supported those in our community, and it might not be monetarily, right? But it was, we donated food, we helped these families, we helped this person go to college, we, my parents were school educators or librarians or doctors, ways that had sort of this community impact aspect to it. So a lot of times getting people to talk about how that played a role on them as in younger ages is a great way to open up the door to the conversation about what role they might want that to play in the future. This idea of including your children in charitable giving is really important. And I think we'll talk about it in a little bit too. One of the things we see a lot is, well, I see a range of it. Sometimes you have donors who very much engage their children at an early age or at some age, and it's very much a family affair. And then there's others where they have very strict sort of boundaries of what they consider, who they consider that should be involved. And especially if you start thinking about spouses of children, even, and we've had conversations around non-biological children of children, grandchildren, as you think about blended families. So this idea of determining who's involved in the discussion is also can be a really important thing, especially at the onset. But the beginning might just be, have you included your children in charitable giving, in general. I think one of the things we've certainly found is that, philanthropy is one of the best ways to begin the conversation around values. And so we talked about this idea of, how do the values translate into giving or community impact or community engagement, even as a young age, whether it's, very directive, like my family told us we had to do this, versus more informal. My family were librarians, and I see that as a form of outreach. Thinking about managing the business and incorporating philanthropy in that, especially for sort of, again, older generations, if they have been involved with or own family businesses. And then here are just some other good questions to ask. This idea of what do you want to change? Who do you want to partner with? What do you want to make a difference, in terms of how do you want your gifts to make a difference for future generations? Sometimes you ask those questions and they just stare at you. At least that's been my experience. So I think starting with those easier questions first and working your way into this is always a good thing. But it just depends on sort of where people are on the evolution of their planning in that regard. And then again, I think this is one of the things we talk to as well, especially when we're talking to fundraisers, this idea of, what are the deeper motivations that would connect donors to your mission, right? And I think there's so often in our community, and probably in most communities, you look for capacity first, right? You say, okay, these are the wealthy people in our community, so we should ask them, for donations to this organization. When the reality is, the better is to look at what's the connection, what's their connection to the mission, what are they motivated by, and then try and pair up giving opportunities. And so that's a lot of what we do, is saying, okay, how can we find out what motivates them, what they're connected to, and then make that connection? Because if it's just about reciprocity, which you always have to kind of make room for that, especially with the type of donors we all might work with. Somebody asks them, they have to return and respond, and that's fine. But the stickier aspect would be to really find out, again, what they're interested in personally and how to pair up giving opportunities that way. So that's sort of the next level of what we get to do if we have time with families, and it's really fun. And then let's see, I'm still going. I think I can't see my slide numbers, John. And then again, we have a workbook. So one of the things you're going to see that we're going to show you resources later, the Foundation for the Carolinas and the wonderful Rebecca Allison, who I think is on today, led the creation of a family workbook. These exist, with various providers. Your companies may have those as well, that have a reading list, engagement exercises, tips for evaluating nonprofits. John, I know the American Heart Association has something similar as well. We're going to talk about that later. But here are some examples of sort of family engagement exercises we have used with clients that kind of track some of the questions I just mentioned. So first, memories of generosity. What problems would you solve? This, if you had $1 million to give away today, where would you give it? That's always fun. It's fun to dream and to see what people come up with. So again, sort of to the extent you have time, especially with a family unit, these would be fun exercises to engage in. And as I mentioned, here's the sort of opportunities. There's a reading list in the toolkit that I mentioned, but then we also have examples of instilling philanthropy to every age. And I think as Charlotte's community is evolving age-wise, we are hearing more and more from clients who are looking for ways to engage their young teenage and young adult children in the experience of philanthropy. And so here are just some ideas. And again, they don't have to be big dollar amounts and they don't have to be overly formal, but a lot of times people are just looking for ideas. And so here are some good ones that are included in our workbook.
We're going to transition a little bit and talk about the philanthropic landscape. As you work with your clients and you see from their tax returns really possibly what they are giving to, you understand the concept that they may have of what's important, whether it's a community foundation, whether it's a local charity, a national charity. The one thing I would tell you, the American Heart, that we struggle with is, since we are a national charity, funds that come to us can be frequently are used locally, especially if that's what the donor wants. But all the money that we do spend locally is raised on a national basis. So I wouldn't steer anybody away from any of these. It's a difference on their philosophy. As we look at what type sector that they want to benefit, human rights, religious, spiritual, health, cultural, medical, youth, education, we talked about those earlier. But again, generally, it's the lens of their life, I use that term again, that will dictate where they have this desire. If their grandmother, for example, was a big worker in their church growing up, and they want to do something that honors or memorializes that, maybe that's what it is. Or maybe if someone got a scholarship going to college, and that's helped them get through school, whereas otherwise they couldn't have gone to school, education could be what it is. But again, you just never really know. And that's the one thing I would just say, don't take for granted just because they work in a particular area or they have a certain interest that you're aware of, that deep down there's something that's very different. I've always found that to be something that you need to explore with folks. Do your clients want to give to a lot of different charities using the word sprinkle, or do they want to make a splash with one? Again, different people have different motives. If you have a client that wants to give away $100,000 and give $10,000 to 10 charities, that's great. But if they gave $100,000 to one charity that could really be more meaningful, is that important to them? Do they want to invest in programs of building with brick and mortar? Obviously, charities need both. Most people want to do programs, and brick and mortar generally comes in a capital campaign. But there again, you've got to have the brick and mortar generally to have programs. We also still see many donors today that want to start their own private foundation. We're going to talk about donor advised funds in a few minutes, but again, the private foundation has a very big part in the world today, and it certainly is the way that you can include a family that is similar to a donor advised fund, but can be very different. And do they want to fund operational needs? As I mentioned earlier, what pays Catherine's salary and my salary is money that comes in, and it's unrestricted. So everybody needs operating money. Generally, people don't like to do that. And just to be honest, they like to have it a little bit more specified. But again, you have people that want that as well. So how do you choose the charity? So you've gone through the process. You understand that your client wants to be philanthropic. You've talked about what they want to fund. So how do you figure out which charity to go to? Well, obviously, you can go online. I mentioned Charity Navigator recently. That's a great resource to see where people do spend their money. Another guide that I use often is called guidestar.org, and it will tell you that it shows you the tax return, and it will show you what they actually spend the money on versus what they might say they spend the money on. There's something to look at. Never be reluctant to call the charity directly and interview the staff, because there's generally somebody like Neil or me or Catherine that work for the charity that will talk to you about what the mission is and what happens. Your colleagues, they obviously work in the same community, so they variously have had good experiences and possibly some bad experiences with charities. Again, we go back to the purpose. So do they want operational income, programmatic? Do they want to fund an endowment? Is it a current gift? Is it a pledge with multi-year payments, or is it annual gift? It also may be that it's a legacy gift, that they want to make a planned gift because they don't feel like they can do what they want to do during their lifetime. But there again, there's all of the things that plays in how do you choose that charity in the beginning. So the giving techniques, we could spend an hour on each of these: a CLUT, a CRAD, a CRUT. Those are all things that pays income back to the donor during their lifetime, and then ultimately, well, the last a CRATs and a CRUD. The CLUT is where the income goes to the charity during the lifetime, and that's generally for more wealthy families that do those. A charitable gift annuity, most nonprofits offer those, and that's where you're exchanging an asset for an income stream. A donor advised fund, Catherine's going to talk about in a few minutes. Family foundations, there again, we don't see them going away. They're on the decline because of donor advised funds for a lot of reasons. A bequest, again, it could be that legacy gift, an outright gift because they're looking for a tax deduction, or they see the immediate need today. And then we also see the blended gift is where you give an outright gift and then you possibly fund it with more money with a bequest. A good example of that would be a scholarship where you might fund it with some money today, but you totally fund it at your death with a bequest. So Catherine's going to talk to us about donor advised funds.
Yeah, absolutely. And John can do this too. And I think it's always just, worth a mention here as an accessible way for a broad set of folks interested in philanthropy to potentially engage. I know a lot of you on the call have experience with this personally. Certainly, I think as John said, they, because of the rise of popularity and just the accessibility of them as a vehicle themselves, it may have had an impact on private foundations. I think one thing is, John, as you were talking about, do they want to, different motivations or considerations for giving? I think another one that often comes into play, especially with donor advised funds, is how do you want to give? The how meaning, do you want to be recognized or do you want to stay under the radar? And a lot of times this idea of being able to be anonymous will in fact drive the decision more so even than family engagement or size on the donor advised fund. So again, everybody's, it may be about the type of asset they want to give and they need a public charity deduction. It may be that they want the ability to stay anonymous. It may be that they need to do it fast and they don't have time to create a private foundation, whatever the motivation, right? A lot of times it's just, our role to try and help uncover that. But the bottom line is donor advised funds are offered at Foundation for the Carolinas, at commercial gift funds, at community foundations, at national charities like American Heart Association. And the idea, of course, is, as you all know, or most of you do, is the idea of making a current tax deductible contribution, maximizing the contribution because it is a public charity, unlike a private foundation. And then retaining advisory privileges, as the name implies, to direct the money out in future distributions to other qualified nonprofits. For the Foundation for the Carolinas, it can be a minimum of $100 and to any public charity in the US. And so this idea of being able to make a gift today that can have future philanthropic impact gives people the gift of time. It gives people the gift of maximizing a gift today they may not have otherwise wanted to make outright to a charity, and then distributing it over a period of time to determine either where they want to give, how they want to give, who they want to engage in the experience of giving, all of that. And so sort of the ability to create something immediately, fund it regularly, and then decide when, where, and how to distribute it is very appealing to donors. And certainly I think it's why you see these huge numbers here in terms of the growth of donor advised fund accounts. Foundation for the Carolinas, the minimum opening amount is $10,000. A lot of the commercial providers in the last 12 to 18 months have actually eliminated the opening minimum. So the idea is that you can create it really with any initial contribution of any size. And so the idea of making it a vehicle that a range of folks can use to engage in philanthropy, again, hopefully the goal is that philanthropy grows by virtue of having more options. And that's certainly our goal, right? This number is good because hopefully it means that more folks are being more philanthropic, and that's what we want.
Catherine, I might add there about donor advised funds is that for your clients that are giving away money, they might have 100 receipts to take to the CPA once every year if they are very philanthropic. With a donor advised fund, you have one receipt, and it's the receipt of the initial contribution. And there again, you can follow along with what a tax event might occur in their life, that they have a sale of some nature and they want more of a tax deduction this year versus others. But they don't necessarily know where they want the money to go. It can go in the donor advised fund, and then you can give it out over time. Nationally, people give away 20% of their donor advised fund every year. And we see people that put the money in that don't give it away, which obviously Congress doesn't like. And there's some pending legislation that might change some of this. But then there are plenty of people that put the money in and immediately spend it. The way I look at the community foundation of any community is that's a relationship, because that community foundation, especially, and we're so fortunate here with the Foundation for the Carolinas, is that they invest in our community and they're making their community better for all of us. It's just not for a group of people, it's for every one of us. And especially when you look at the projects, especially here, that they've done, the theater that is coming on board soon downtown is a prime example of something that had there not been the vision for the Foundation for the Carolinas, that would have been lost and would not be a resource for us as a community. The other thing though I would say about some of the commercial gaffes, they tend to be more transactional. And you put the money in and the money goes right back out. And that's fine, but relationship driven, having an impact in the community is where I see the role of the community foundations.
Thank you, John. And that is I wholeheartedly agree. But also, like I said, I think the important part is that one of the roles we play is to encourage philanthropy in all its many forms. And so, we're just, we're committed to advocating for all the options that are there, but certainly we felt very strongly that the Community Foundation offers an added value proposition of great meaning for our local community in particular. I think as you look about what assets are available to donate to donor advised funds, and frankly to any organization, and John can talk about this as it relates to American Heart Association, perhaps, but the idea of being able to leverage a wide range of assets is also particularly appealing in a donor advised fund or major gift context. So this idea of not just thinking about giving back cash by check, by credit card, but there are, as all of you on this call know, significant tax advantages to giving long-term appreciated assets, publicly traded securities, which you see there, but also the idea of illiquid assets. And this is something that, again, a whole nother CLE that our team has provided, but the idea of taking real estate, closely held business interests, private stock, and other illiquid assets and leveraging those for charity. And really the idea, once again, is to use our expertise and our advocacy to unlock a greater portion of charitable dollars for whatever missions and organizations your donors care about. So all we want you to know here is that we accept a variety of assets. We have a super knowledgeable staff. And so to the extent you ever have donors sitting there asking, know that we serve as a resource, whether or not we end up at the table in the long run, to help advise clients and advisors about kind of the art of the possible, really, especially as it relates to different types of assets. Go ahead, John, sorry.
As we're working with the charity, there's a couple of things that you need to really make sure. Of course, my dog has come in and wants to be on the screen now, so I apologize.
Time to come on.
Well, he's right here. So can the charity actually accept the asset that you determined that you want to give away? So can they take real estate? Can they take business interests? Many can, many can't. So that's just something you need to certainly understand. Contact the charity for their interest and experience. All charities should have a gift acceptance policy, and that just outlines what they can take and what they can't take, and if they can't take, what might be an alternative for that. Complex business interests in real estate, again, can get very detailed. A charity may not have the staff that's knowledgeable or a staff that's large enough to really have any expertise in it. They also may have a board that doesn't want to go down that road. So there is some drawbacks. Other considerations would be the mission, making sure that what the gift you want to make complies with the mission of the organization, and the viability of the charity. You want to make sure that you're investing your money in something that's going to be around. So you want to make sure that the financials are good, they're strong, they've got good leadership. And again, I go back to guidestar.org because that's where you can see the tax return, the Form 990 that all nonprofits have to file, and you see salaries and where the money is going. And you also see if they're making a profit every year. Everybody has to make a profit to move ahead. We can be not-for-profit, but we have to make revenue in order to survive. And then finally, would the Community Foundation be a better choice? Because again, if some of these things don't comply with that individual charity, then the Community Foundation very easily would be a good choice. I would use an example generally of a animal shelter. My dog came from a shelter this past year, so I love shelters, but they generally do not have the sophistication to take in a piece of real estate or maybe even taking stock. So the Foundation for the Carolinas really may be a better choice for them.
I think another thing that happens too, John, is the idea of donors being it being difficult to consider a single asset, which may generate a large potential for gift, and identifying a single beneficiary for that asset, right? Sometimes you absolutely have donors who say, okay, and certainly there are big examples of those, for colleges and universities, houses of worship, right? But I would say that the idea of being able to take a single asset, which often is quite meaningful for a donor, and leverage it for a variety of charitable beneficiaries, in addition to the tax advantages, often is what's driving a lot of our conversations with donors in that space. So I agree. I'm actually, John, if it's okay, was going to skip to the resources so we can get to the planning ones, if that's okay. And I talked a little bit about our guidebook which is on our website and available for you, for your clients. It's great. And John, I don't know if you want to talk about sort of the resources available through the American Heart Association before we look at the planning trends.
I have the same thing. So you can contact me directly and I can send you a PDF copy or a physical copy, but both of them are good and they go in detail what we've been talking about.
Great. So why don't, we're going to kind of hit on a few of the current planning trends. Before we do that though, with the 5 minutes remaining too, any questions? The question that was offered in the chat, which I cannot see, somebody sent it to me, was very helpful. Any other questions or folks that want to unmute and give any thoughts before we look at some of these sort of practical examples? No, yes. John, your dog has any questions? My husband just tried to walk through, so luckily that we avoided that crisis too. all benefits of working remotely, right?
We just decided to go outside.
That's right. Okay, so John and I were talking about sort of the practical things we've seen, especially in the last year or two, as it relates to donors and charitable giving. Wanted to kind of hit on a few of these things. Likely you all have experienced and seen these as well. The first one is sort of this idea of bunching. I think it's particularly relevant for donor advised funds, although certainly I think if a donor was looking to pre-fund a multi-year commitment directly outright to a charity, possibly as well. But as given the increase in the standard deduction, one of the things we're seeing is donors who may want to sort of bunch their charitable giving to take advantage of itemizing in a particular year. So maybe they're doing, 40 or 60,000 of charitable contributions in year one. And then they are, just taking the standard deduction for year two and year three. So that is something we saw a lot, especially I think when this change was enacted in 2017. And so, suspect that we'll continue to see that for a certain set of donors, which again, is just another helpful planning tool. So, as the opportunity, obviously donor advised funds qualify for this as a public charity. And so the idea of being able to kind of pre-fund a couple years worth of giving in a donor advised fund, yet again, the idea of being given the gift of time allows donors to fulfill those goals in a tax efficient manner.
I would also say with bunching, it allows you to make that contribution from a tax perspective and not have to use the money all at one time. So that's another reason why you may want to consider doing that with the client.
Yep. Great point. IRA rollover. Oh, being slow to transition here. Let's see. There we go. IRA rollover, not new, but new as a permanently enacted provision. So again, the idea, and to cut to the chase, of course, is just that an IRA owner, once they are over 70 and a half, can take up to 100,000 max per IRA owner and roll that directly to charity, tax-free, and in a way that applies towards their RMD. So from a planning opportunity, of course, if a donor has an IRA, they're in the position where they have to start taking their RMDs and they do not need the income. This is a great opportunity to fulfill charitable gifts. Caveat being that the donor advised funds and private foundations are specifically excluded. There are also some other charities that are excluded, but those are the two main ones I think for you all to know are excluded from the IRA rollover. So our team, and I'm always amazed at how often our team will get gifts from donors whose advisors do not know that DAFs are excluded. And so we do a really good job of saying, hey, are you sure? You can do it, but you're going to have to report this as income, right? And so, to fully sort of comply with this provision, it can't go to a donor advised fund. So American Heart Association, other direct public charities, great. I will say that other types of funds at the Foundation for the Carolinas are eligible. So for example, if we have a donor who made a pledge to the Carolina Theater campaign or Read Charlotte, any of the initiatives and programmatic aspects that we hold the funds for, so long as it's not a donor advised fund, it is eligible. I've also had a lot of donors who created endowments, named endowments for single beneficiary funds also, which are eligible. So I had a donor who created a series over 3 years, created $100,000 endowments each year in his name to create an annual $2,500 gift, right, to the Mint Museum. One was for the Mint Museum, one was for the McCall Center. I think one was for crisis assistance, right? So there are some interesting planning opportunities there. John, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I would also just remind you that IRA money is the worst money for your clients' children to inherit, and it's the best money to leave to a charity. So just remember that, because the charity would not pay any income taxes on it through a planned gift, whereas the children would pay income taxes on it. And with the Secure Act, is limited 10-year payout rule as well.
So that, everything John, I agree with everything John said. And then I would say, and even still, or even more now with the Secure Act and the limit of stretch distributions, what we've seen is even more, especially as it relates to testamentary gifts. We have seen even, we already had a tremendous amount of our plan giving pipeline donors who were leveraging IRA assets to fund charitable organizations or funds or donor advised funds and the like. I think we saw an even greater interest in this in the last year with the Secure Act and the change related to the 10-year rule. So a lot of folks who had children that they were leaving IRA assets to, but had charitable intent, are now kind of reconfiguring assets. So agree with that entirely. And then John was going to talk a little bit, I'm going to move on to that and talk a little bit about the CARES Act and how that's impacted giving to his organization and in general.
Well, the CARES Act, as you know, was last year, and it's been extended into this year, that you could give away cash to public charities up to 100% of your AGI and erase any tax liability. And you think about that, it's pretty powerful. It really is pretty powerful. I had a client that in December liquidated a mutual fund for $653,000 that he's paid capital gains in over the years, and he then took that money and made a year-end contribution to us of that $653,000. And it was truly a tax move. We were actually the beneficiary of the IRA of this mutual fund to begin with, so we were going to receive it. But this way we received it and he got the tax benefit as well. So this is just not something to overlook and think that your clients wouldn't do this. Just think about it. Again, it has to be cash, has to be to a public charity, can't go to a private foundation, split interest, or to donor advised funds. And again, it has to be cash. That's just a real key. So just think about that.
Absolutely. And there we've done a fair amount of advising, and there's some information on our website as well around this idea of stacking to maximize all the various provisions, as John said. So, your typical 30% in appreciated assets, stack with additional appreciated assets, and then the cash contributions in a way that can really take advantage of these rules, which, as I understand it, apply through the end of this calendar year. We haven't seen any,
That's right.
Any rulings that say it would be extended, but certainly something we're monitoring. So. Okay, we're 2 minutes over. Hopefully y'all are still with us. John and I are both available. We'll stay on for another few minutes if you have any questions. We are so appreciative that you all came with us today. Thank you to Neil and Valerie and the Foundation for the Carolinas team for putting on this content. For any of you that are still here, let us know if this is helpful. Let us know what types of education you want to see. We've made a real concerted effort to add CFP in addition to CLE, which we've done historically in terms of credit options or continuing ed. And so, let us know what you want to hear from us. Let us know how we can help you, how we can help you help your clients. And just thank you for your partnership. And John, thank you for your joint presentation.
Thank you as well.